The blue spruce still stood in the front yard, just as it had when they'd moved into the modest two-story colonial in 1985. Back then, it had been barely taller than Raymond, a sapling they'd planted to mark their new beginning. Now it towered over the house, its branches stretching towards second-floor windows, a living calendar of their 40 years together. Martha stood at the kitchen window, coffee cooling in her hands, watching as morning light filtered through those same branches. 6 weeks since the funeral, and still, each day began with this strange suspension between sleep and waking, the moment before remembering that Raymond was gone. Then reality would settle back in, heavy and unmovable. A massive stroke at 72. No warning. No chance to say the things that suddenly seemed so essential to say. Just an ordinary Tuesday evening that ended in sirens and hospital corridors, and finally, devastating stillness. Now, at 69, Martha was learning to navigate a world empty of the man who had occupied so much space in it. She'd managed the immediate aftermath with a stoicism that surprised even her, arranging the service, greeting mourners, signing documents thrust before her by funeral directors and hospital administrators. Friends marveled at her composure, not seeing how she collapsed each night, exhausted by the performance of functionality. "You still have your home," her sister Margot had reminded her last week during their weekly phone call. Raymond made sure of that. No mortgage to worry about, at least. It was true. Raymond had been so proud when they'd made that final payment 3 years ago. He'd framed the letter from the bank confirming their mortgage satisfaction and hung it in his study, a testament to decades of careful financial management. Martha took a small comfort in this evidence of his planning, his determination to leave her secure. The familiar weight of his wedding ring hung from a chain around her neck, warming against her skin as she moved through the quiet house. The doorbell rang, startling her. She wasn't expecting anyone, and few people visited unannounced these days. Setting her coffee down, she crossed to the entryway, smoothing her sweater and running a quick hand through her silver-streaked hair. Through the side window, she could see a man in a pressed shirt holding a leather portfolio. When she opened the door, he smiled professionally. "Mrs. Caldwell? I'm Michael Reeves from Eastern Regional Bank. I've been trying to reach you by phone regarding the second mortgage. I was in the area and thought I might catch you at home." Martha stared at him, uncomprehending. "Second mortgage. There must be some mistake. We paid off our mortgage 3 years ago." The man's smile faltered slightly. "Not the primary mortgage, Mrs. Caldwell. The home equity line of credit taken out 14 months ago. We've sent several notices regarding the past due amount." Martha's hand tightened on the doorknob. "I think you have the wrong house," she said firmly, certainty in her voice. "Raymond would have told me about any loan." Michael Reeves opened his portfolio and extracted a document, turning it so she could see. "This is the agreement, Mrs. Caldwell, signed by Raymond Caldwell on March 8th last year. The current outstanding balance is $43,750, with a payment of $685, now 2 months overdue." Martha's eyes moved over the document, landing on Raymond's familiar signature at the bottom. The room seemed to tilt slightly. "There's been a mistake," she repeated, but doubt had crept into her voice. "My husband passed away 6 weeks ago, and I'm just getting things sorted. I'll need to look into this." The bank representative nodded, sympathy now mixing with the professional demeanor. "I'm very sorry for your loss, Mrs. Caldwell. I didn't realize. Here's my card. Please call me when you've had a chance to review your records. There are options we can discuss." Martha took the card mechanically, closed the door, and stood motionless in the entryway. It wasn't possible. Raymond had always managed their finances, yes, but they'd made major decisions together. A second mortgage would have been discussed, debated, agreed upon. She would have signed papers too, wouldn't she? Moving with sudden purpose, Martha went to Raymond's study, a room she'd avoided since his death, finding the emptiness of his chair too painful a reminder. The satisfaction letter from their original mortgage hung framed on the wall, just as she remembered. Raymond had always been so organized, so methodical about their finances. His filing cabinet stood in the corner, each drawer neatly labeled. She pulled open the one marked House and began sifting through folders. Property tax records, insurance policies, renovation receipts, and then, in a folder labeled simply Equity Line, she found it, a complete set of documents for a home equity line of credit from Eastern Regional Bank, maximum amount $60,000, with Raymond's signature on every page. Not hers, just his. Martha sank into Raymond's desk chair, documents trembling in her hands. How was this possible? Why would he have taken out such a large loan without telling her? And what had he done with the money? As questions multiplied in her mind, the phone rang, its shrill tone cutting through her confusion. Almost on autopilot, she rose to answer it. Mrs. Caldwell, this is Jason Kelly from Midwest Financial Services. I'm calling about the personal loan account that's now 45 days past due. Martha closed her eyes, a chill spreading through her body. What personal loan? By evening, Martha sat surrounded by papers at the dining room table, a glass of untouched wine beside her. The day had brought 3 more calls, 2 from credit card companies and another from a different loan servicer. Each conversation revealed a new piece of a puzzle she hadn't known existed. Each disclosure felt like a separate betrayal. According to her hastily compiled notes, Raymond had accumulated $43,750 on the home equity line of credit, $16,200 on a personal loan from Midwest Financial, $22,780 spread across 3 credit cards she'd never seen, $9,300 on a loan from his 401k plan. Total, $92,030, all within the last 18 months, all hidden from her completely. Martha's mind cycled through possibilities, each more distressing than the last. Gambling. Raymond had never shown any interest in casinos or sports betting. An affair. The thought made her physically ill, but she couldn't dismiss it entirely. Medical expenses he'd hidden to protect her from worry, but they had good insurance through his retirement plan. Nothing made sense. She reached for her phone and called the one person who might have insight. Robert? It's Martha. I need to ask you something about Raymond. Robert had been Raymond's closest friend for over 30 years, their weekly golf games a fixture in both their lives. If Raymond had confided in anyone, it would have been Robert. Martha, good to hear your voice. How are you holding up? She dispensed with pleasantries. Did Raymond ever mention financial problems to you? Loans he'd taken out? Debts of any kind? The pause on the line lasted just a beat too long. Why do you ask? Robert's voice had shifted, cautious now. Because I've spent today discovering that my husband, who I thought had left me financially secure, actually left me with over $90,000 in debt I knew nothing about. Her voice broke on the last words, anger and grief tangling together. Another long pause. He swore me to secrecy, Martha. He said he was handling it, that he didn't want you to worry. Handling what, Robert? What was the money for? Robert sighed heavily. It started with Daniel. Raymond was helping him after the divorce, getting him back on his feet. Then when Daniel's business ran into trouble, Raymond stepped in again. He kept saying it was temporary, that Daniel would pay him back once the business turned around. Daniel, their son, 38 years old and still careening from one crisis to another. A gifted architect whose talent was perpetually undermined by poor choices and worse timing. Raymond had always been softer on him than Martha had thought wise. more willing to step in with financial support that seemed to delay rather than promote Daniel's independence. "How much did he give Daniel?" Martha asked, dreading the answer. "I don't know exactly. A lot, I think. But Martha, it came from love. Raymond couldn't bear to see Daniel struggle. Love that had led to lies. Love that had left her vulnerable. Love that might cost her the home they'd built together." After hanging up, Martha sat motionless at the dining table, watching darkness settle over the yard. The blue spruce was just a silhouette now against the night sky, its shape familiar, yet somehow changed in her perception. Like her marriage. Like her husband. Like everything she'd thought was solid in her life. The next morning brought no clarity, only a deepening sense of urgency. The bank representative had mentioned options, but Martha needed to understand her position before having that conversation. With a determination born of necessity, she made an appointment with a financial advisor recommended by her sister. 3 days later, she sat across from Patricia Hale, a certified financial planner with a direct manner that Martha found reassuring. "Let me be clear about your situation," Patricia said, after reviewing the documents Martha had brought. "In most cases, you would be responsible for debt that was jointly held, accounts with both your names, loans you both signed, but several of these obligations appear to be in Raymond's name only." She tapped the equity line paperwork with a manicured finger. "This is unusual. Normally, both spouses would sign for a home equity line, since it involves the property. Did you sign a quitclaim deed at any point, relinquishing your interest in the house?" Martha shook her head. "Not that I recall. The house has always been in both our names." Patricia frowned. "Then I'm not sure how this was processed without your signature. A lender processing a loan on a jointly owned home without both signatures. That's a major oversight and could be your best legal defense." She made a note, then continued. "Now, about the credit cards and personal loan, these are solely in Raymond's name. In a non-community property state like this one, you're generally not personally liable for debts that were exclusively your husband's." A flicker of hope rose in Martha. "So I don't have to pay those?" Patricia held up a cautioning hand. "It's more complicated than that. While you may not be personally liable, creditors can make claims against your husband's estate. And if the estate has insufficient liquid assets to pay those claims, they could potentially force the sale of estate assets, possibly including the house if it was part of the estate." "The house is all I have," Martha said quietly. "I understand. That's why we need to determine exactly how the house was titled. Joint tenancy with right of survivorship, tenancy by the entirety, or some other arrangement. That will affect whether creditors can reach it." Martha nodded, though the legal terms were only vaguely familiar. "What should I do in the meantime? The calls keep coming." "First, we inventory everything. Assets, debts, insurance policies, retirement accounts. Then we determine which debts you're legally responsible for and which belonged solely to Raymond. After that, we develop a strategy, which might include negotiating with creditors, potentially selling assets, or even considering bankruptcy if necessary." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "But Martha, I want you to understand something important. This situation, while difficult, is not as unusual as you might think. Many spouses, particularly of your generation, kept financial matters separate, with one handling most decisions. Financial infidelity, hiding debt from a spouse, is something I see regularly." She paused, making sure Martha was listening carefully. "It's more common than you'd think. But any time only one spouse handles everything, it's a red flag. Full financial transparency isn't a luxury, it's a safeguard. Had you been involved in all financial decisions, Raymond couldn't have taken these actions without your knowledge." "We were married for 40 years, Martha said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought we knew everything about each other." Patricia's expression softened. "Sometimes the people closest to us are the ones we're most afraid to disappoint. From what you've shared, Raymond was trying to help your son, without burdening you with worry. Misguided perhaps, but coming from a place of care." Martha wasn't ready for such generous interpretation. The betrayal felt too raw, too consequential. "Care that might cost me my home." Patricia nodded, acknowledging the reality. "Yes, and that's why we need to act quickly. I'll need your permission to contact these creditors, request verification of the debts, and begin negotiations where possible." As Martha signed the authorization forms, she felt a strange mixture of relief and apprehension. For the first time since the bank representative had appeared at her door, she wasn't facing this alone. But the path forward remained shrouded in uncertainty, with her home, the physical embodiment of her life with Raymond, hanging in the balance. The next weeks passed in a blur of financial archaeology. Martha excavated Raymond's study drawer by drawer, folder by folder, uncovering the strata of their financial life together, and the parallel financial life he'd apparently led without her knowledge. Bank statements revealed regular transfers to their son Daniel over the past 2 years, ranging from $1,500 to $4,000 monthly. Credit card statements showed plane tickets to Phoenix, where Daniel lived, trips Raymond had explained as golf outings with Robert. She found a folder labeled Desert View Investments, containing documents for what appeared to be a real estate development in Arizona, presumably Daniel's troubled business venture. Each discovery was another fracture in the foundation of what she'd believed about her marriage. As she continued searching, Martha found something that stopped her cold: a small stack of unopened envelopes addressed to her, tucked into the back of a file drawer. Several were from their credit card companies, others from their bank. All bore dates from the past year. With shaking hands, she opened one. It was a notification about unusual account activity, the opening of a new line of credit. Another contained information about their mortgage satisfaction that she'd never seen. Raymond had been intercepting their mail, systematically removing anything that might reveal his financial activities. What else, she wondered, had been hidden from her so methodically? Raymond, always so steadfast and trustworthy, had constructed an elaborate framework of deception. Not malicious, perhaps, but deception nonetheless. She tried calling Daniel twice. Both calls went to voicemail. Her messages, carefully worded to avoid accusation but clear about the urgency, went unreturned. The third time, she texted instead, "I know about the money from your father. We need to talk. It's about whether I can keep the house." His response came 3 hours later, "Working through some things. We'll call when I can. Sorry. Sorry." As if that single word could encompass the position he and his father had put her in. Meanwhile, Patricia had been making progress on multiple fronts. The title search revealed that the house was indeed held in joint tenancy, with right of survivorship, meaning it had passed directly to Martha upon Raymond's death, outside of probate. This offered some protection, though not complete immunity from creditors' claims. The home equity lender admitted that their documentation was incomplete. They should have required Martha's signature as a co-owner of the property. This opened the possibility for challenging at least that portion of the debt. The credit card companies, after initial resistance, seemed open to settlement offers. Perhaps 60 cents on the dollar if she could make lump sum payments. "Where would I get that kind of money?" Martha had asked when Patricia presented this option. "That's the difficult part," Patricia acknowledged. "You might need to consider selling investments, taking a loan against your retirement accounts, or even selling the house if keeping it becomes untenable." Selling the house. The possibility loomed larger with each passing day. Martha found herself walking through the rooms with new awareness, cataloguing memories as if preparing for their loss. The dining room, where they'd hosted 40 Thanksgiving dinners. The living room, with the small burn mark on the hardwood floor from the time Raymond had knocked over a candle during a power outage. The garden she'd tended for decades, where Raymond had built her a pergola for their 30th anniversary. Could she bear to leave it all behind? And yet, what choice did she have? Her own retirement savings were modest, sufficient when combined with Raymond's pension and their mortgage-free living, but inadequate to absorb a $92,000 debt and still provide for her remaining years. Raymond's life insurance, a policy they'd maintained for decades, had been surrendered 18 months earlier. Another discovery that left her breathless with disbelief. The cash value had apparently gone to Daniel as well. As the financial reality clarified, so did Martha's anger, not just at Raymond for his deception, but at herself for her willing ignorance. She had abdicated financial responsibility throughout their marriage, content to let Raymond handle everything from investments to insurance to tax preparation. Her signature on joint tax returns was often the extent of her involvement in their financial life. Now she was paying the price for that passivity. 7 weeks after her first meeting with Patricia, Martha received an unexpected call. "Mom, it's Daniel. I'm at the airport. I'll be there in a few hours." Martha felt a complicated surge of emotion, relief, anger, a stubborn remnant of maternal concern. "You're coming here. Now." "I should have come for the funeral. I know that. But I couldn't face everyone, not with what was happening. I'll explain when I see you." Martha had almost forgotten that Daniel hadn't attended his father's funeral, having sent a brief message about being tied up with urgent business matters. At the time, grief had overwhelmed any capacity for additional hurt. Now, that absence felt like part of a larger pattern of selfishness. "I'll be home," she said simply, and ended the call. Daniel arrived as evening approached, looking older and more worn than Martha had expected. His once athletic frame had softened, and new lines etched his face, particularly around eyes that darted nervously around the familiar entry hall. "Mom," he said, setting down his bag and moving to embrace her. Martha accepted the hug stiffly, then stepped back. "We need to talk in your father's study," she said, turning without waiting for his response. The room remained as Raymond had left it, except for the stacks of financial documents now organized on his desk. Martha gestured for Daniel to sit, then took Raymond's chair, a position that felt both wrong and necessary. "I know about the money," she began without preamble. "All of it. The loans, the credit cards, the home equity line, the life insurance. Nearly $100,000 that your father gave you or spent on your behalf, all without my knowledge." Daniel's eyes dropped to his hands. "He wanted to help me. Things got bad after the divorce, and then when the development project hit permitting issues, I needed capital to keep investors from pulling out. And now I might lose my home because of it." The words hung in the air between them, uncompromising in their clarity. Daniel looked up, genuine shock registering on his face. "Lose the house? Dad said the help he was giving me wouldn't affect your security. He promised me that." "Your father made a lot of promises, it seems. To you, to the banks, not to me." The bitterness in her voice surprised even Martha. "I didn't know," Daniel said, a defensive edge creeping into his tone. "He told me he had investments, savings set aside specifically for this. He never mentioned loans or credit cards. And you never questioned it. Never wondered how a retired high school principal could suddenly provide tens of thousands of dollars for your business ventures." Daniel flushed. "He was always good with money. You both were. The house was paid off. You took nice vacations. It seemed possible." Martha pushed a folder across the desk. "This is what possible looks like, Daniel. $92,000 in debt that's now threatening everything I have." She watched as her son paged through the documents, his expression shifting from disbelief to dismay. "I had no idea," he repeated, looking up at her. "Dad never said anything about going into debt. He told me he was helping temporarily until the project turned the corner." "And has it? Turned the corner?" Daniel shook his head slowly. "The whole thing collapsed 3 months ago. The primary investor pulled out and everyone followed. We couldn't secure the permits we needed without making design changes that would have made the project unprofitable. So the money is gone." It wasn't a question. "Yes?" Martha absorbed this confirmation of what she'd already suspected. The magnitude of Raymond's gamble and its failure settled over the room. "What happens now?" Daniel asked after a long silence. "Now I decide whether to fight for this house or sell it to pay off your father's debts. Whether to spend my remaining years in financial precarity or with some measure of security, but without the home we built together." She looked directly at her son, allowing her anger and disappointment to show plainly. "And you decide what kind of son you're going to be in this situation you helped create." The words were harsh, harsher than she'd ever spoken to him. But the time for gentle handling, for maternal protection, had passed. Daniel seemed to age before her eyes, responsibility settling on him visibly. "I want to help. I don't have the money. Everything I had went into the development. But I can work, contribute something monthly, and I can help you figure out the best path forward." Martha had expected excuses, perhaps even accusations that she was overreacting. His willingness to accept responsibility was unexpected, a small counterweight to the burden she'd been carrying alone. "Patricia, my financial advisor, is coming tomorrow at 10. You should be there." 2 months later, Martha stood in the freshly painted living room of a 2-bedroom condominium across town, directing movers as they positioned her sofa against the wall. The decision to sell the house had not come easily. Patricia had outlined several potential scenarios, including bankruptcy and aggressive debt negotiation while trying to keep the house. But each option carried significant risks and would have left Martha financially vulnerable for years to come. The house, which had appreciated considerably over 4 decades, offered the cleanest solution, painful but definitive. The sale had been swift in the strong market, yielding enough to pay off all the debts and provide a substantial cushion that, invested conservatively, would supplement Martha's modest pension and social security. The condo, while smaller, offered one-level living and lower maintenance that better suited her current circumstances. No yard to tend, no stairs to navigate, no empty rooms echoing with absence. Daniel had been surprisingly present throughout the process, flying in 3 times to help sort through decades of accumulated possessions, making countless trips to donation centers, and managing the logistics of the move. He'd also committed to monthly payments to Martha, not enough to change her financial situation significantly, but a meaningful acknowledgement of his role in what had happened. More importantly, he'd connected her with a therapist specializing in grief and life transitions, recognizing that her losses were both material and emotional. Dr. Sarah Bernstein had helped Martha navigate the complex terrain of her feelings toward Raymond, the anger at his deception existing alongside enduring love, the recognition of his misguided attempts to protect her, while acknowledging the harm those attempts had caused. Financial infidelity breaks trust just as powerfully as other forms of betrayal, Dr. Bernstein had explained during one particularly difficult session. And when discovered after death, it's especially complicated because there's no opportunity for explanation, apology, or repair with the person who caused the harm. Those words had given Martha permission to feel the full spectrum of her emotions without guilt, to be both the grieving widow and the betrayed partner, to honor 40 years of marriage while acknowledging its imperfections. As the movers finished bringing in the last of her belongings, Martha thanked them and closed the door on an empty apartment. Alone for the first time in her new space, she moved slowly from room to room, taking inventory. The furnishings were familiar: the dining table where they'd shared thousands of meals, the reading chair Raymond had favored, the bed they'd slept in for decades. But the context was entirely new, creating a strange dialogue between past and present. On the small balcony overlooking a community garden, Martha paused. No blue spruce here to mark the passage of time. No physical reminder of beginnings and endings. Instead, an open view, unobstructed possibilities. Grief would always be her companion now, walking beside her as she navigated this unexpected chapter. But alongside it, something else was emerging. A hard-won wisdom about money, about relationships, about resilience. Raymond's deception had forced her into financial literacy that she'd avoided throughout their marriage. Now she reviewed investment statements, understood tax implications, and asked pointed questions of financial professionals. She'd met with an estate attorney to create new advance directives and a will that reflected her current circumstances. She'd even joined a finance group for widows at the community center, where women shared both practical advice and emotional support. The lessons had been costly, but she was determined they would not be wasted. 6 months after moving into the condo, Martha hosted a small dinner party. Her sister Margot and her husband, 2 friends from her widow's support group, and Daniel, who was in town for a job interview. As they gathered around her familiar dining table in its new setting, the conversation flowed with surprising ease. They talked of everyday things: a film recently seen, a recipe discovered, plans for the upcoming holiday. Normal life, continuing despite extraordinary disruption. After dessert, as they moved to the living room with coffee, Margot raised her cup in an impromptu toast. "To new beginnings," she said, eyes warm with affection for her sister. "And to Martha, who has shown us all what resilience truly looks like." The others echoed the sentiment, but it was Daniel's addition that caught Martha by surprise. "And to Dad," he said quietly, "who made terrible mistakes trying to help me, but who loved us both the best way he knew how." Martha felt her throat tighten, unexpected emotion rising. In that moment, she realized that forgiveness was not a single act, but an ongoing process, complex, non-linear, deeply personal. She might never fully reconcile all aspects of Raymond's actions, never completely understand the choices he'd made, but perhaps understanding wasn't a prerequisite for moving forward. Perhaps it was enough to acknowledge both the harm and the love, to hold the contradictions that make up any long relationship, and to choose what to carry and what to leave behind. Later, after the guests had departed and Martha was alone again, she sat on her balcony watching the community garden below, where residents tended their small plots in the fading evening light. One elderly man worked methodically among tomato plants, his movements conveying decades of accumulated knowledge about growth and care. Martha found herself wondering about his story, about the hidden currents that might run beneath its surface. Every life contained secrets, she'd come to realize. Every relationship had its unspoken territories. The question was not whether these existed, but how they shaped the visible landscape, and what happened when they suddenly emerged into view. For Martha, the revelation of Raymond's financial secrets had forced a complete rewriting of her future. The safe harbor she thought he'd provided had proven illusory, built on shifting sand rather than solid ground. Yet from that painful recognition had come an unexpected gift: the discovery of her own capacity to rebuild, to make difficult decisions, to create security on her own terms. At their final meeting, Patricia had expressed both professional admiration and personal concern for Martha's journey. "You've handled an impossible situation with remarkable grace," she said, reviewing the final settlement figures. "Not everyone finds their footing after such a profound betrayal of trust." Martha had nodded, acknowledging both the compliment and the reality it described. "What would you tell someone else in my position?" she asked. "Someone whose spouse handles all the finances, who signs tax returns without reading them, who assumes everything is being handled properly." Patricia considered the question carefully. "Financial secrets between spouses are among the most destructive forces in long-term relationships," she replied. "Even when kept with good intentions, they undermine the foundation of trust essential for true partnership. The most loving thing spouses can do for each other is maintain complete financial transparency, even when the news isn't what they wish it were." She paused, making sure her next words registered. "Never abdicate your financial awareness, even in the most trusting relationship. Insist on regular financial discussions. Know where important documents are kept. Understand your household debt, assets, and insurance policies. These aren't signs of distrust. They're acts of love and responsibility toward yourself and your future." Martha had nodded, thinking of the countless wives who, like her, had delegated financial responsibility to husbands out of trust, tradition, or simply lack of interest, only to find themselves vulnerable when circumstance forced their participation. How many were one death, one divorce, one revelation away from similar discoveries? The most crucial red flag, she now understood, hadn't been Raymond's behavior, but her own willing disengagement from their financial life. Her unquestioning acceptance when he presented the paid-in-full mortgage letter but handled all other financial documents privately. Her lack of curiosity about accounts, investments, insurance policies that would ultimately determine her security. Her comfort with signing tax returns she hadn't read and couldn't interpret. These were luxuries she could no longer afford, and that no spouse should indulge in, regardless of how trustworthy their partner might seem. As darkness settled over the garden below, Martha rose from her chair, feeling the slight stiffness in her joints that came with age. 70 now, she faced a future different from anything she'd imagined. Smaller in some ways, a condo instead of a house, more limited resources, adjusted expectations. But expanded in others, new knowledge, new communities, new understandings of both resilience and vulnerability. The next morning, Martha did something unexpected. She visited a local nursery and purchased a small blue spruce sapling in a terracotta pot. It was barely 2 feet tall, delicate compared to the towering giant she'd left behind. Carefully, she positioned it in the corner of her balcony, where it would receive the most sunlight. As she patted the soil around its base, she felt a familiar emotion, not just grief or anger or resignation, but the quiet hope that comes with new growth. Raymond's final, unintended legacy had been to thrust her into self-reliance she'd never sought, but had discovered she possessed. The blue spruce that had marked the decades of their life together belonged to new owners now. But this new sapling would mark the years ahead, years that were entirely her own to shape. Financial takeaway. Martha's story reminds us of a crucial truth. Financial secrets, even ones kept with good intentions, can destroy the very security they aim to protect. Whether you're married or single, financial transparency isn't just about spreadsheets. It's about trust, legacy, and the life you're building. Talk, plan, ask questions, and most of all, stay involved. The partner who manages your money today might not be there tomorrow, and the financial decisions made in your name will outlive any relationship, for better or worse. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe to Goldprint for more real stories about life's financial journeys. And let us know in the comments, what would you do in Martha's shoes? Your insight might help others facing similar challenges.